Stay tuned for the Joan Quinn Profiles. As an editor for Andy Warhol's Interview, the Los Angeles Herald-Examiner, LA Style, and Detour magazines, Joan covered the social set, the Hollywood hotshots, the international art scene, the mysteries of food, the excitement of travel, and the fabulous world of fashion. Joan continues to find creative people on the cutting edge who make things happen. Here's Joan Agajanian Quinn.
Hi, I'm Joan Quinn, and welcome to the Joan Quinn Profiles. Our guests waiting to be profiled are artist James Mathers and author Belinda Rathbone. Artist James Mathers was born and raised in Los Angeles, just like I was. But as a teenager, he wanted to take off. He's what he calls himself a Topanga kid. He went to a special school for geniuses, but as I say, he left for New York. Why did you leave so early? You were 16 years old.
17, actually.
Oh, you waited an extra year.
I waited an extra year. Well, I chose at my graduation of high school to go directly to New York and to pursue what I believed was the most important thing I could do, which was paint pictures and be an artist.
Was there an artistic program for you when you were in that school? I don't know what the name of the school was.
Yeah.
What
right
was
down
it
here
called?
in Pico in Arlington, Center for Enriched Studies. Yeah, I sort of couch surfed through high school, and there was a lot of available space in this school. Half of it was condemned, and I took over some of the condemned space and set up a studio, and I was and active in developing myself as a painter and working with other kids who were also painters and sculptors in the school.
Right there at the school. Was there any kind of this artistic bent in your background? Your parents?
I was driven from the very beginning. I think when I was 2.
But were they painting? Were they taking you to the museum? How was it?
No, they were. My mother worked 5 jobs. I hardly saw her.
Oh.
But I was given a crayon at around the age of 2.5, something like that, and that was it.
And the crayon you took today, and you made this portrait.
Yes.
Was it the same crayon?
Well, it's not exactly the same crayon, but I mean, how strange that 40 years later I'm still running around with a crayon as my primary tool.
That's why I brought it up, because it was so interesting. You just said sit there, and you started. I said, "Are you going to do pastels?" No, I have a crayon.
Yeah,
you know.
It is strange. Time really is an illusion. Nothing changes at all.
When you got to New York, did you start painting in New York? How did you find a place to do anything?
I had a locker at the Art Students League.
Oh, you did.
And I slept in the bus station for a while, and then I got a room, and I was a construction worker for a bunch of what were they? Lithuanian unlicensed construction workers doing demo.
Who would take kids.
And I worked till I wept, and I painted every day, and I worked and I worked and I worked, and then, it was the Lower East Side.
Did you hang out with any artists? Did you know artists?
Yeah, I knew them all.
Did you? You did know?
I knew them all. I mean, I could sit around and drop names and say,
Yeah, let's hear them, because
Jean-Michel Keith Haring, Kenny Scharf, Kondo.
George, how did you get to meet them? They weren't working on these construction sites where you were, although a lot of them were working too.
It was a lively social scene, And of course, I would get dragged around and introduced around by this one and that one, and we didn't all like each other. It was a very bitchy social scenario, and it was area.
Was it late 80s?
Early 80s.
Early 80s.
Area, Milk Bar, King Tut's Wawa Hut, CBGB's, Alphabet City, Nature Mort.
The cool time.
Yeah, the cool time, and it was exciting, and as it rolled through the 80s, terrifying as everyone started to drop dead.
That was the really hard part, wasn't it?
It was like the plague years. It was like a dark age. Everyone was terrified.
But a lot of things, not only AIDS, but drugs.
Yeah. Well, it was all tied together, and exhaustion.
And exhaustion.
People would just party themselves to exhaustion, and you know, and some of us continued to work, and some of us died. And
did you have a studio there?
I had a studio on Broadway and Houston Cable Building, 7th floor.
Oh, you did? So you did start establishing yourself there.
Right upstairs from Keith and Kuntz, when he had his first place.
Is that right?
Yeah, he has
Jeffrey?
basketballs and.
Did he?
He had these glass boxes full of, you know, household appliances.
Did you think it was peculiar, or did you think?
No, I mean, I loved it, you know.
At least Keith was making images, right?
Yeah, and
Kenny was making images.
Well, we create objects for interpretation. This is what we do. I mean, now, in 2006, now strikes me as even more than then, even more than the sort of wild, kind of decadent 80s, now, paradoxically, is really the time to be an artist. Strangely, there's less and less money.
That's interesting that you would say that, because it seems like everything is so open and there's no new ideas, and people are just taking from what they've seen in the past.
No, I don't think that's the case at all. I think that what we have now is huge, overwhelming, like a giant wave is about to break on all of us. The state of mind is insane in this city. And
we're talking about LA now. You came back from New York.
I've been in Los Angeles for the last 10 years. And all we have in the face of all these changes, economic, social, the police state, the war, the kind of corporate oppression, everything, the universe is description.
It's description, and then you're making the art to go with it.
Well, that's what artists do.
Isn't it? So
we describe.
Right. Exactly. It's true. So.
And every act, every dancer describes, every singer describes, every painter describes, every photographer describes, and out of this welter of interpretations, we create a reality. All we have left from all of the collapsed civilizations from before, all we have is their art objects.
Always.
That's it.
I know, and you're holding something that looks like it's from an ancient civilization. Can I hold it up to the camera?
This is one of my favorite pieces. It's a shovel made from the death mask of James Joyce that I acquired in Ireland.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, when I was working and living in Ireland, making bells and stuff. And this is a shamanic piece. I've used it in a lot of rituals. I've, beaten giant rats with it.
I thought it was a Topanga Canyon piece.
No, this is James Joyce, who was one of the first time travelers along with Proust. Proust and Joyce were the first people to bend time and to describe a world changing.
But that's what you're talking about too. How would you describe your artwork? Other than what you're saying, that it's taken on all this.
The only thing I can say about my artwork is that it's completely necessary for me.
So we don't have a style.
If I don't create, this is right now. These works are examples of my most recent stuff, which I'm calling my glam period, because I'm using lots of glitter.
But that's a specific style.
Yeah.
That's different from, say, the sculpture that you just showed us.
And I do performance, and I have.
Do you use these in performance?
I use them in performance. I use them in everything goes into it.
What about something, the poetry book? You've done that.
I work with Pablo Capra, who's my publisher. I've been developing with a bunch of other poets a thing called the Crap Poetry Movement.
But do you write the poetry, or you
I
just
write it.
Oh, you do?
I perform it. I encourage other people. It's a workshop.
The illustration.
And that's lifeasapoet.com if you want to check out our
But
projects.
Those are all just art places, right? You work with Mark Baer, who's a writer.
For 20 years I've worked with Mark.
And he's done some books, and you've illustrated.
We've done books together. This is it. This is the underground, the real underground in the arts in Los Angeles is not happening in the galleries on, Beverly Boulevard and.
But what about downtown and Chinatown?
It's in the underground.
In Topanga. That's because you're a Topanga person. It's always happened there, hasn't it?
It's always been a hotbed of radicalism. You had Ellen Geer before, and that was a huge
Sure,
dissenting voices.
From the Blacklist. Her father was blacklisted and started the Theatricum.
Theatricum Tannicum, and we're still doing it. You know, we're still doing it now. We're still creating.
One of the things when you came back from New York, because we don't have much time, but I wanted you to talk about it. You said you came back and you studied or worked with Norman Wisdom.
Norton Wisdom.
Norton Wisdom.
Norton Wisdom is also. I consider him to be my arts education came to me through Norton. He gave me my first studio in Los Angeles.
What did he do for himself?
He is the great eminence of the painting scene in Los Angeles.
I see.
He's with a band called Magic Box, and he plays all over town. I would love to have him on the show and have the Box play. They're great.
Fabulous. But that was your big inspiration. That was where you found a home, more or less, when you came back to LA.
Yeah, and the rodeo grounds. And the rodeo grounds just was expunged. Not 6 months ago. We had a whole community down there. It was one of the best neighborhoods in the city, wiped out by the state.
Well, tell the audience, the rodeo grounds were in Topanga.
The rodeo grounds was in the bottom of Topanga. It was a community of a couple hundred people. We had amazing improvisational housing down there, and was a very, very tight and productive creative community in Los Angeles.
So that's where you talk about things beginning,
yes,
and the underground and what went on in those kind of places.
Yes.
Before we leave, do you have a favorite artist in past years rather than contemporary artists that
being like what
to?
my inspirational leader? I'd have to, out of all of them, I'd have to say Joseph Beuys.
Oh.
I think Joseph Beuys for the 20th century, or for the second part of the 20th century, maybe Dubuffet or Duchamp.
That's what I wanted.
Earlier, but Beuys.
It's
I'm
funny.
a Beuys-ian.
But Dubuffet, when you said, I look at this piece behind you, and that's what I see when you say that.
Yeah, it's sort of
funny.
A glamorous Dubuffet.
Is it?
Yeah, but I mean, but for me it's Beuys, the philosophical foundation of what art is to become. If we're to rebuild the civilization as it collapses, is going to have to go along those lines. It's a ritual. It's necessary. The arts are necessary.
I agree. And you know how to keep them alive.
Well, we do our best.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, James.
Thanks, James, really, because I know that the depth of what you're saying is the part of your life that we're all learning about today.
Thanks, yeah.
Thank you. And don't go away. We'll be right back with author Belinda Rathbone. Hi, I'm Joan Quinn, and welcome back to the Joan Quinn Profiles. I'm with author Belinda Rathbone, who has written on modern photography, organized exhibits for MoMA, Polaroid Corporation, the Spanish Ministry of Culture, and she's written, and really, as the worldly American daughter of a museum director, I guess that you knew about these places, you knew about museums, and you really knew how to delve into it.
Well,
where was your father?
I did always feel very at home in a museum, I must say. Whenever I traveled anywhere, once I was grown up and traveling by myself, I always found that I could ground myself in a new city by going to the museum.
That's very interesting because it's like a feeding, isn't it?
Yes, it really is. And it was like a sign of, if there's culture here, I'm going to be okay. It's kind of like a bookstore, really.
Exactly. When the exhibitions that because you'd written on Walker.
Walker Evans.
Walker Evans. And were those exhibits on his work, or were they different photographers?
I've done a number of different kinds of exhibitions, some group shows.
But in photography?
Yeah.
All photography. So that's really your genre.
It really is. And sort of, I have to say, I've kind of drifted away from photography in recent years. my marriage took me very far from the heart of it all.
And that marriage was the inspiration for your book, a memoir called The Gind.
That's right. That's right.
And it's about the Georgian mansion that you went to restore in Scotland. But before we even started on that, I wanted to talk a little bit about photography, because that had to have been the gist of what you were doing. You wrote for a lot of magazines too, didn't you? And you wrote
that's more
articles.
recent, actually. The magazine writing is more recent, and in a way comes more out of my experience in Scotland.
Oh, it does?
Yes.
Oh, I see. So going into the background of Walker Evans, did that help you look at these things in any way?
Yes, that's a really important, interesting point. It did. I mean, I think...
Because he was in Cuba. You had to research this whole thing.
Oh, yeah. My biography of Walker Evans took me all over the place. But the work that really that I love most of Walker Evans is the work he's done of interiors.
Oh, and that's what you had to deal with in Scotland.
Exactly. And especially when he photographed interiors in the South that were, in terrible condition.
I was going to say but they did have something to do with you then. I was going to say, if he did those interiors in the poor sections of the South, it really didn't have anything to do with you, but in fact it did, because when you took over, when you moved into the mansion.
Yes, it looked like a Walker Evans a bit.
Isn't that interesting?
Walker Evans actually loved faded grandeur. He really had an eye for it.
And so that drew you. I'm seeing so much comparison here.
It's really
faded.
Yes. But also he has this wonderful eye for the essence of a culture, how it reads visually. So no matter what culture you're moving in, if you're educated in a way of seeing, then you're just better at it, I think.
That's really interesting. When you were putting on these exhibitions, were you writing? Was there writing involved? Did you do the catalogs?
Oh yes,
what did
always,
you do?
Yeah, exactly. Always had to. When I did an exhibition for the Spanish Ministry of Culture back in the late '80s, and this was a survey of American photography from early 19th century work right through the present, and it's just a dash through history. I wrote the whole history of American photography,
you wrote that.
Just in a very short piece. But that's the kind of thing I was doing.
Did they use that for their public relations, and they were probably quoting you all the time?
And their catalog and everything.
And their catalog and all of that.
Yeah.
What kind of a museum did your father work with or direct?
He directed first the St. Louis Art Museum.
Oh, yeah.
And then the Boston Museum of Fine Arts.
Oh, he did? Oh, how nice. It's the best. Isn't
it great?
The best museum?
It is, I have to say.
I mean, I think it was built at the same time as the Metropolitan, wasn't
it?
Or
exactly.
They were competitors in a way.
That's true.
And it's so wonderful, the Museum of Fine Arts.
They were both celebrating their centennial year in 1970, and I do remember a sense of competition. But
also that gave you the comfort. I think I see where that comfort zone can come from.
Yes.
Very, very interesting. Yeah. So here you are. You married a laird. What's that?
Most people don't know what a laird is.
Well, that's
it's
why
quite
I'm
true.
asking you.
A laird is a word related to lord, of course, and landlord. These are all related words. A laird is simply a Scottish gentleman who owns some land.
Oh, that goes along with it.
Land is where it's at.
Land is part of that laird?
Absolutely. You have to have land to be a laird.
So where did you meet the laird?
I met him in Vancouver, of course. I mean, no. It's so unlikely that we met at a wedding.
But you met in the United States?
Yeah, in Canada.
Oh,
yeah.
But had you seen where he was living? Did you know anything about it?
I knew a little bit about it. But I needed to have a much closer look before I got too involved.
But the thing is, with these landlords, do they all have one thing in common, or are there common flaws? Flaws. I'm calling them flaws because what you went through seemed to me like this common flaw rather than string.
Yes, it was. Well, this is a really interesting subject. What is the common flaw? I think one of the things is that it's really feudal, and it takes you back to a time in Europe where the landowners, kind of ran their own little community, which is their landscape, with a number of cottages and farm buildings and so on. And it creates a sense that if you are that laird, you kind of live by your own rules, really. But that doesn't mean that you aren't also you must have a great sense of responsibility toward the people who are living there.
The thing that you just said is what was on my mind while I was reading feudal.
Yeah.
And it goes back all the way, not just the way the tools that you used or the way you were living in that house.
Yeah.
But also the social part of it.
Yes.
Was kind of feudal.
Yes.
Didn't it seem to?
You mean the social part of
it.
this, of the hierarchical nature of the society?
Yes.
Absolutely.
And they still have it today?
Oh yeah. But the interesting thing is that you're on very intimate terms with both, others who, you're actually on more intimate terms with the people on the farm itself who are of a different class, but they are your best friends in a way.
And yet the person who owns that house wants to keep themselves above it because that's where their family's been for 400 years.
Well, that's right, and they sort of have to.
Now, you started out by keeping a diary. Why did you start keeping a diary? You got married and you went to where? To Edinburgh?
Right. To north of Edinburgh, in the county of Angus, and picture a beautiful, unspoiled countryside of farms and woods. And why did I start keeping a diary? I have to write something, and as I said, my marriage took me very far from the art world that I'd been steeped in New York City.
I see.
And I was sort of casting about for some subject matter. And I just started writing. And I also wanted to remember the experience and share it with others.
But were you writing your innermost thoughts, or were you just writing like something like a book that you would share with other people, or notes that you would share? Did you think about all of that?
It took a long time for it to really take shape as a very personal journal.
Uh-huh.
And I was, as I sort of struggled to give it structure, more and more of my readers would say, make it more personal,
But when they were reading your notes.
Yeah.
But why didn't you write this book, The Gind, as a fictional piece? It's so revealing. It reveals every kind of, to me, so personally involved. All of your personal involvements is what I'm trying to say.
Right. So, well, a lot of people did say to me, too, why don't you make it fiction? Because then you can really let loose.
Yeah.
But I'm quite wedded to nonfiction as a form. And I also wanted you to know, as the reader, that this was real, even if it doesn't seem real a lot of the time.
How did you feel about belonging? Because what you've described, we're talking about hundreds of years, the people that you're living with, the people in the community are at your level socially.
Right.
How did you feel like you belonged coming from the U.S.?
Well, I think I was always regarded with a little bit of curiosity.
Curiosity, good.
They
Did they accept you?
But they did, and on the whole.
There were so many problems, though. Every time you turned around in that house, there was a problem.
Yes, that's for sure.
And you had to build a life with your neighbors.
That's right. I had to build a support support. What do we call it?
Yeah.
You know, when you feel you've got a lot of people you can call on, and I did. I really did. I still have great friends there.
I think that what's so funny is we're talking about all the Scottish. We always talk about the Scots as being so frugal, but your husband was totally frugal. And how did you deal with that? Tell us a few of those funny stories.
Well, one of the first things I discovered is that, you know, I believe in recycling paper. Sure, that's fine. But what I didn't realize is that we were actually saving the paper so that we could sell it by the ton.
Oh, that's right. That's interesting.
And so that was alarming to learn that we were actually sort of filling up one of the stables in the back with just waste paper. And I thought, oh my God, wouldn't that space be more valuable in itself as space than the paper that is waste paper? I mean,
well, talking about that, then you had tenants too.
Yeah.
And you had bad tenants.
Oh gosh, we did. Yeah, we had good and bad.
You had robberies.
Yes.
Things that you don't think about.
That's right.
I don't think. I mean, it seems like you're totally surrounded by your community that you just described.
Yes.
So how did those things happen?
Well, and this is the thing. It is an interesting, as I said, it's an intimate relationship you have with the tenants. You really are living together as a kind of family. And in the best of worlds, that's a great thing. Because then you're out in the country and you can all help each other with frozen pipes and what have you.
That's what it seems.
But at the same time, you are also in this class system, which is not always comfortable.
Oh, I see.
And
so that's what happens about
and sometimes if things don't go well personally between the laird and his tenants for one reason or another, then you can't trust them necessarily to walk away happy. I think that's.
I want to thank you. I want to thank you for being here today, and I thank you for writing the Gind. And we'll see you all next time. Keep writing to 777 South Figueroa, 44th floor, 917 in Los Angeles. Bye. Oh my gosh, it went so fast.